So, hey Andrew, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good, and yeah, I'm really stoked to be talking with someone that's actually into a bit of the history of the sport. So, tell me about the book. Now, how long have you been writing it, and what's kind of the guts and the gist of the book, and when can people get hold of it?
Yeah, so the book is online now, available for pre-order on Amazon. It's the complete history of cross country running, and Skyhorse Publishing in New York is behind the book. They've released about I would say hundreds of running titles. Dr. Jason Karp just released his The Inner Runner from that label, and
Nice.
they're a big domestic publisher. So I was extremely excited to have them support the book. And the imprint Carroll Books, which is the imprint of Skyhorse that is releasing it, is big in academia. They're big into libraries. The releases that they focus on usually go to public libraries and sell for a little bit more expensive. And so the book in the States is valued at $49.99, which I feel is a worthy price, a little bit expensive if you compare it with other titles.
Right.
But the caliber of the research and the content is really unmatched, and the story has never been told before. So,
No,
of
it's
course, in my
super
mind, I think
exciting.
it's worth it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but
how long
I
did it
started
take?
writing the book in 2012. I was really, as an enthusiast of the sport, I was really disheartened to see that there wasn't a cross-country history available. I think every sport, when you're a child, needs to have a title on the shelf. If you're into football or into
Yeah,
basketball, you can go and find a history of the sport and find the big names and kind of get excited about it that way.
yeah.
And so I wanted to capture the stories. I wanted to capture the teams. I wanted to capture the individuals and their training and the coaches and the drama of how everything unfolded and where it came from. And so I just went after it. Being an unmarried male in the Bay Area with access to Stanford University really helped,
Right.
and having time to devote to kind of the pursuit.
Nice.
But it really was one of those things where I just did everything I could to compile the research and then filled in the gaps along the way, trying to answer the questions of, wow, that's a fascinating connection. Where did it come from? How can we find out more about this? And the pursuit ultimately led, after the research was compiled, to talk to the big names and folks who are still alive and really passionate about the sport.
Right.
I was lucky enough to connect with Craig Virgin. He's the two-time world cross-country champion from the United States in 1980 and 1981.
Awesome.
And sure enough, he was in good health and good spirits, and was the first kind of correspondent with the project that really helped me see the vision for where it could go.
That's amazing.
So,
yeah. It sounds like it was
yeah,
a challenge by the sounds of it.
it,
Yeah. How
it
how,
really
how did
just
you
was
go
a
about it? I mean, was it literally just a hard out research project? Is that kind
yeah.
of the
Well,
bones of the project?
it it was one of those things where the rabbit hole was deep and the
Right.
time was much. Um,
Right.
for me, you might find a book or a newspaper article or even a snippet in a magazine that references something,
Mm.
and then it produces an immediate Google search, and you have to find out whether it's legitimate or who said what and where it came from,
Right.
and that just digs deeper and deeper. And there's wonderful little tidbits, that come across. And there are numerous ones in the book that you'll have to kind of pick it up and read.
Yeah.
But the the gist is, in the history of the sport, that there has been so much activity and so much discussion about kind of the nature of cross country, that what we see today has already been discussed before. These are echoes of conversations had generations before.
Okay.
The acceptance of cross country globally as kind of this sport that, can we accept more participants and more people, has been a discussion that has started since the 19th century.
Right.
And so what we're seeing today with the challenges from the East African nations and athletes who are kind of, let's just say, not particularly media friendly or well known, that those discussions have been at the heart of cross country for years.
Okay.
And people today look at the sport and say, well, it is what it is, so to speak. But to approach it that way is to kind of dismiss the years and years of peaks and valleys that cross country has seen in the wider range of athletics.
So from your research, basically you're kind of believing that this is just a natural part of the sport's history. These peaks and troughs, these challenges, this is part of. So the African dominance in the sport now is a phase within the sport that will be overcome and evolve. Do you believe that that's going to be the case?
And no one is really talking about it, which that's the fascinating reason why you should read the book.
Right.
But when the sport originated, it was England and the home countries of the United Kingdom that really embraced it initially, and it was France who became the first real challenger to the English dominance of the sport internationally in the early 20th century. And if you think about the 30 or 40 year run that the British and the French had nationally in the international championship, I mean, we're seeing this reflection with Kenya and Ethiopia today.
Right.
And it was the same reason why other nations were so hesitant to jump in feet first with this idea that, well, we can't even challenge the best in the world. Why try?
Right.
And that kind of defeatist outlook lasted for years, but at the same time produced terrific athletes from other corners of the globe that eventually decided, yes, we want to challenge for the best. We think we deserve it.
Yeah.
And it leads to athletes like Emil Zatopek. It leads to athletes like Rod Dixon, and kind of these athletes who you would never really expect to be the kind of the supplanters of the mighty throne that England had established. Right. So the website is the Real XC, the Real Cross Country, and honestly, it's really just an enthusiast's attempt at making sure that people understand that cross country has a place in the narrative of other events like the marathon and Olympic track and field. And I started it because I was really dissatisfied with the idea that you can find anything you want out about records and events regarding track and field and athletics, but you can't find a darn thing about the history of cross country out there. Oh. So I started it in 2012, and we've been going ever since.
That's so cool. I admit that I'm into the history of the sport, but I'm not I'm not really into it because I just don't find there's enough information out there. So it's really good to see a really tight subject of the sport like you're doing. There's lots of content on the website. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you're obviously a runner yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was kind of a late bloomer.
Right.
Wasn't a record setter in my youth, but broke 5 minutes for the mile pretty consistently, and found myself on a team in college in Chicago, running Division III, which in the States is kind of the amateur enthusiast level of competition in college.
Nice.
And came back home and became a cross-country coach, and that's kind of where this all started.
Okay.
I was doing my team yearbook for the kids, the youths at the high school level, and realized that for the section I was about to make for them in the history section, online had about 3 sentences worth of cross-country history, and I felt like that wasn't enough to give a good background.
Oh, that's really cool.
And it's unfortunate because, well, even in Australia and New Zealand especially, there is a long history, one that many people probably don't know, that starts well before the integration of athletics and track and field as we know it today.
Right.
And so Richard Coombs is the name that comes to mind. He's kind of the grandfather of all of athletics and sport in that area. And he was a transplant from the UK at the end of the 19th century, and brought with him all kinds of interesting events and ideas, and started the first cross-country clubs out there. um, relatively near to when the United States was starting, probably within a decade or two um, in that period. And it was kind of colonial expansion for the reasons that you find the English were practicing the sport, and they wanted to bring that same air of competitiveness to other portions of the world.
Right.
But it was also for the same reasons we practice it today. It's quite nice to get outside and run around in the dirt.
Yes.
And people were having fun.
Cool. So that's the origins of cross country sport, cross country running. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. Well. The English brought it about because of this game called the Hare and Hounds, or paper chasing, which relatively easy game to practice. And its origins came from imitating fox hunts on horseback. The youth in the early 19th century would imitate the kind of the privileged elite and their ability to get on horseback and chase after foxes and use the hounds to chase them down.
That's so cool.
Kids in boarding schools would practice this on foot, and they would have two designated hounds who would run ahead and lay paper, and when the paper ran out, they would turn around and book it home and race each other through the woods, and that's kind of how the sport came about.
Whoa, that's so cool! It's God, this is the thing. Like, I'm English, right? And I don't know any. I mean, in all fairness, I was quite late to running, and running culture. So I think that's why I'm genuinely intrigued now. I've seen a few talks on a bit of the history of running, and I honestly think that as a runner, we should at least have like this kind of discussions. Just amazing, because just finding some of the origins of the sport and what brought it around and where we are now. So I can understand. I'm not really a history guy, but for some reason, when it comes to running, it really intrigues me.
Well, it's fascinating for everyone, because I think that having conversations like this, especially from my perspective, I started it from a historical perspective. I looked at it and said, where's the history? Why isn't there more being talked about? And it's really kind of fascinating sometimes. There's, even in the 19th century, there's competitions that spring up, and there's court cases between them, and all kinds of drama between athletes and things like that.
Right.
But the discussion carried into the present day, circling around, global competition, the World Cross Country Championships, and kind of the regional championships, is that there's no enthusiasm, because you've got nations like Kenya and Ethiopia and Uganda who are simply dominating these events.
Right. And
you've got more traditional powers like the UK who are saying they don't want to send maybe their best athletes abroad to compete when they know already that the competitive level might just surpass what they're bringing to the table.
Right.
And so to kind of balance this, the feeling that I got over the course of the years of research that I put forward was that really we shouldn't be dissuaded by the idea that we can't be competitive against these good nations. We have to embrace the history, and we have to bring a competitive level that is on par or parallel with what we've done before.
Yeah.
That would challenge the very best in the world.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think the trouble is, because the sport's become a bit of a circus, and money talks, and it's all about winning. In a way, there's that fear of losing, because then the investment won't be paid back. Is that kind of really getting to the point why, because you're not going to send a team over you've invested millions of dollars in, if you feel that you're just going to lose every time. But like you're saying, that's the essence of sport, isn't it? I mean, to actually just get amongst it,
Oh, absolutely, and there's an incredible background to it that many people don't even recognize.
Right.
Even of note, locally, more locally for you guys, the top non-African finisher in the most recent World Championships, which took place this last March, only a few months ago, was Patrick Tiernan from Australia. This young man who won the NCAA championship in cross country in America.
Right.
And even more recently, in 2011, 2013, the United States team won the silver medal, the team medal in the senior men's competition for the World Cross Country Championships, and no one knew it. No one even batted an eye.
Right.
It went kind of unregistered, and so there's a lot of momentum, but no one knows about it. And so, just like you were saying, money talks, and the bigger events, the ones that are a little bit more available to broadcast and sponsor, things like indoor track and field and outdoor track and field and marathon running.
Yeah.
These events are exploding, and cross country has kind of gone by the wayside, as you said, a little bit of a circus, because not many people know about it. No one knows who's competing, and they understand that the privileged nations are kind of losing out to the East African nations.
Right.
And it's becoming a little bit more difficult to really get behind, I think, from administrative level.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. I mean, we kind of take it not for granted, but we know of cross-country running events, and it's kind of part of the running world. But on a global stage, like you say, and I've kind of not really thought about it that much till now, there's not really that much publicity, and it's not really a popular sport, is it? I mean, table tennis is more popular, really.
That's true. And the problem that I've kind of come across in the years of looking at how great this sport has been in history is that it doesn't have to be this way.
Right.
One of the chapters in my book, actually every chapter has an event spotlight, what I call kind of the defining event of the decade.
Right.
Each chapter in the book is by decade, and the one for the 1980s takes place in 1983 at Gateshead in England. And I titled this event, Every Nation Has Its Hero, because it was that year that you find in the Senior Men's Championship that just about every nation had one representative that was going toe-to-toe to the wire, and it produced one of the closest finish in world cross-country history.
Right.
The winner was Bekele Debede from Ethiopia, and he beat out the very first Kenyan representatives, Ethiopian representatives, and was fighting with the best European and American representatives as well. You had Carlos Lopez, you had Alberto Salazar, you had Rob de Castella, you had Antonio Prieto of Spain.
Right.
You had these names that were just about representative of every corner of the nation, of the globe, excuse me. And it was just so amazing to see these athletes all without the pre-existing conception that the Africans are going to dictate this race and that we better fall behind and follow suit.
Right.
And so that kind of ethos, that kind of mentality can come back to global cross country running, and I really think that there's potential for people to get behind it. There's an explosion of people doing obstacle course racing and mud runs and muddy buddy type events, and cross country has been doing this for generations.
Yeah, it's a really cool discussion, this, because it does it highlights that kind of imbalance towards cross country running, and there's so many reasons, but there definitely does seem to be. Yeah, that does seem to be like a mentality that Africans are going to be winning running events now globally. End of, Yeah. But it's not. But why are there not many cross country African runners? Because that's the other question. Because when I think of cross country runners, I do think of Americans, Europeans.
Sure.
And I don't know why. Because maybe it's because the media, they're not involved with the sport like we've just discussed, so they're not kind of a part of those sports. It's an interesting kind of way of looking at it. I've not really, until now, I've not really kind of sort of seen it from that point of view. But do you think that this is purely the reason for it, or do you think Africans are not really geared physically towards cross country running on dirt?
Well, I think it speaks more to the state of the sport and kind of the marketing angle that the IAAF and the administration of some of the governing bodies take
Right.
when it comes to marketing the sport. I mean, you had a terrific marketing, entertaining spectacle this last weekend with the Breaking 2 effort that Nike put on.
Yeah.
And I was just in awe sitting there looking at kind of a pseudo attempt at a world record and all the exposure and cost that went into producing this spectacle. And I'm thinking, this is an event without competition, and here you have the momentum of centuries of global competition with teams from all areas of the world, including Africa.
Yeah.
And you have the capability to really market these individuals, Africans included, as the potential game changers that they are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take the best of the Western world, kind of the stereotypical cross-country runner who's a little bit less known, there's great potential to make these people marketable and media friendly.
Yeah.
And all the administration has to do is embrace it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of opportunity there.
It's already there, isn't it? I mean, it's basically like you say, there are gifted people that are running phenomenal times and very talented, but because it's not in vogue, I mean, it's similar to the ultra running world, isn't it? I mean, I doubt that ultra running will ever become an Olympic sport because it just doesn't. It's just not sexy enough.
It's interesting you mentioned the Olympics because around 2000, the year 2000, it was kind of the last generation of marketable Africans. Paul Tergat and Haile Gebrselassie and Kenenisa Bekele, who endorsed cross-country running entering the Olympic Games again. It had been there in the early 1900s, 1920, 1924. And the big momentum push that came about and is kind of still in the background of all this is seeing cross-country enter perhaps the Winter Olympic stage.
Right.
And Sebastian Coe, the current IAAF president, endorses this and is really behind it, which is fascinating. And the more that I've looked into this kind of potential and in this discussion, it really comes down to two factors. The first being that the Commission for Olympic Sports in the winter, including it in the winter agenda, are against the idea because cross country is practiced almost exclusively not in snow or ice. And the second reason being that there's talk about whether you would have to prepare a course that would be legal and kind of equitable for athletes to compete upon.
Right.
But both of those questions can be answered if you look at what the IAAF is doing right now away from the World Championships in cross country, which is they have been holding a kind of permit series of various cross country events, standalone ones that people may have heard of, like the Cinque Molini, which is the 5 Mills race in Italy. You have the Almond Blossom in Portugal. You have the Great Edinburgh in the UK, which they ran as part of this series for a long time. But if you take those opportunities to run over the course of the winter, there's nothing to be said against putting a few events in winter conditions in places like Finland or Norway, or even the deep southern hemisphere, depending on what time of year.
Yeah.
And really going after the idea that courses can consist of snowy conditions.
Yeah.
It's happened before, and that athletes could qualify, with the IAAF drug testing policy and the constituents behind it. If they really wanted to do it, they could.
Right.
And all the qualifications are there to see it. And Sebastian Coe has said, repeatedly that it would really give an opportunity for African nations to be represented in the Winter Olympic Games quite well.
Right.
And really isn't such a bad idea.
No, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with regards to a lot of potentially why the sport is not as popular in the popular arena because, like you say. And I've spoken to some track athletes that are friends that are involved with the sport here. And there's this obsession with consistency and reproducibility. which is a bit of a fallacy because there's so many elements that come into play that can affect a standard course length or elevation or things like that. But I suppose the nature of running off-road is that those inconsistencies actually add to the challenge and a point of difference towards maybe people that are more used to those conditions over others. It just makes it more exciting, doesn't it? I mean, I think I'm with you on it. Yeah. I'm an off-road runner predominantly myself, and there's just something very special about those natural inconsistencies that kind of make it enjoyable. Personally for me, running around on a track doesn't do it for me, but each track's different too because there's different temperatures and there's different waterlogging on the track and there's slight inconsistencies in the materials. Yeah, sure. It's baffling, isn't it?
Well, for many athletes and coaches, that's kind of the heart of the discussion. Right. Especially when it comes to Olympic inclusion, is this idea of safety and kind of reproducibility. Okay. The highlight of the games, of course, is that various places hold the games, and so if you're going to have an attempt at a sport like cross country, how do you make it the safest and most reproducible, consistent event that you can?
Right.
Some athletes have spoken to me, some Olympians, in fact, current Olympians, and suggested that if you had a gravel or cinder base to the course and then overlaid that with snow, that it would produce kind of a more grippy texture for competition. But the appeal really is seeing the challenge of the natural environment.
Exactly.
And,
yeah.
And that's kind of at the brunt of the discussion. Many coaches find flaw in the idea that you want to challenge athletes to kind of compete in an obstacle sense, with muddy sections or ditches or other challenges. But for me as a spectator, that's what I'm really interested in seeing is not, Galen Rupp running around a track so much as Galen Rupp trying to ford a river or jump over a barrier for the first time.
Right.
And that's kind of exciting to me, although, many coaches would say it's unsafe. And so, how do you reconcile that? That's a question that, the organizers would have to take on.
Right.
But the, appeal of cross country really is the natural environment and getting away from the oval, so to speak. But each of them has their place. I look at track and field as being a very scientific, very precise measurement of human performance.
Oh, it's beautiful,
and cross-country as being a much more natural and hands-off, hands-free environment that allows you to kind of explore your potential and use different tactics. I think it's just a matter of time. But going back to the historical point of just the record of this event, two things spring to mind. The first is that every single elite athlete that you can think of, from Steve Cram to Coe to Dixon, of course, the great New Zealand runner,
yes.
Maintained consistently that cross country was at the heart of their training. Hill training in all kinds of weather and elements, the team aspect. And each of them maintains that it was absolutely crucial to their success in marathon running or on the track or on the roads. And I really believe that, at the heart of every athlete is a cross-country runner who got into the sport as a youth because of that appeal. And the second thing that comes to mind is really the idea that the sport is at an all-time low, if you think about it historically, with the discussion of various nations not sending athletes or not sending teams.
Right.
And the potential, I think at that point, if we examine the competitiveness of the event, it is really ripe for getting back into an expert level, a high elite caliber level, and can really draw in athletes of the best ability that may or may not see themselves as cross-country specialists, but really have an opportunity to represent themselves and represent their nations and their clubs to the best of their ability.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, just chatting about this kind of, to me, seems that the issue with the lack of, popularity for cross-country running in general seems to just purely come down to the industry itself not investing in the sport because they just don't deem it as worthy of making money. It's probably a little bit cynical of me, but yeah, it's quite sad really when you think about it's in its all-time lowest kind of point in the history of the sport. I mean, just talking to you about this kind of makes me want to talk more to other people about it, and I think that's why I reached out to you. Because in all honesty, I believe that knowing some of the history of where you've come from and the sports that you take part in, I'm now starting to see it as a bit more empowering to hear that this sport originated from my own roots. I feel quite proud of that, and I actually don't want to lose that connection to it.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you.
One of my famous quotes from Gandhi. He says there's a place for us all, right? There's a time and place for us all in this world, and the belief that you simply won't go compete at the highest level because of the potential of other competitors forcing you out of the medal stage or the medal, the opportunity to medal just seems ludicrous to me when it comes to athletics, because the entire purpose, the entire point of competition, of course, is to challenge yourself to the best ability. And the youth of today have no problem at all lining up and going for it. In every corner of the globe, the sport is as strong as ever.
Right.
And many elite coaches have mentioned this to me and said, really, it's the case of football or soccer in the United States for many years, where the youth were just fantastic, and by the time you make it to the elite echelon of competition, you kind of lose momentum a little bit. And so I feel like it's great to have that discussion and get people interested in it, because it really values the nature of the sport, and I think it could be one of those things that everyone is really a fan of, regardless of whether it makes a ton of money or not. And,
yes,
could really
I agree.
Be better.
Yeah, I agree. It's I don't know. It's hard not to kind of sound like an old cynic, but I remember those early days you're talking about. With Daley Thompson and Sebastian Coe, and when rugby players actually wore just shirts and went and played rugby, and there was no microchipping and anti-gripping, and I don't know. I mean, it's really you can look back and you can have this nostalgic kind of like feel, but I do think that sport was very different back then. There seemed to be there was less fear towards just going out and giving it a nudge. Like you say, there's not really many of those kind of stories or elements of competition. Well, I'll get this off my chest now. I just don't like the Olympics anymore. I don't even watch the Olympics anymore because it's so formulated and so it doesn't excite me anymore.
Well, the commercial aspects of things and the commercial breaks that they take kind of impact the flow and the feeling of what it should represent, which is really the biggest and greatest stage of national representation. And I agree. I think in many ways we've lost sight of the really the heart and soul of why we practice the sports that we practice. Yeah. And it's unfortunate. Yes. But in many ways, it is, on the other hand, the commercialization and the marketability of athletes that have pushed them to kind of the intense levels that we are now seeing. I mean, I'm still in awe of the idea that a single human being can run a 2-hour and 25-second marathon.
I know. Well, it's interesting. I've had discussion with friends recently, because there was quite a few people that were a little bit jaded about the whole thing. But I said to them, forget the brand, forget all of that. It was a really amazingly well-constructed marketing event too. Mm-hmm. But again, to me, the effort and the skill and the devotion and the talent, like, wow, like, amazing.
And I was shocked. I was shocked to sign online afterwards and see people say, it reminded me of my cross-country team. It reminded me of the team effort that I experienced as a young person, seeing everyone come together behind this goal.
That's
and
amazing.
I just sat there and I said, this is exactly what cross-country needs.
Totally.
It needs the enthusiasm and the audience to believe in their national representation, to get excited about the idea that on the world stage, every athlete from the mile to the marathon could potentially be in one race together against everyone else's best national representation of their best distance runners.
Yeah.
And really, that's what cross country is all about. And so, at the heart of the Breaking Two effort in this idea of going after milestones in perhaps the most entertaining way possible, I really support that endeavor. But of course, from the commercialization aspect of it, I'm looking at it and saying, "Oh goodness, can't we just
Yeah.
turn down the volume a little bit on the Nike billboard?"
It was a little bit, it was a little bit nauseous, wasn't it? And a lot of it unsubstantiated too. I mean, I'm not a physio or a sports scientist, but some of the it was an interesting viewing pleasure. I think it was. I was about 1,800 meters up a mountain. I've got to share this story with you and the listeners, because to me this is kind of where it's such a good time to be alive in this world and this sport. So I'm nearly 1,800 meters up a mountain, and I was streaming the Nike event live while watching the sunset over Mount Cook. Now,
that's amazing.
It blew my mind that I could do all of those things and be connected in that way. It was, for me, very special on many levels. Yeah.
But by the same token, I'm having this conversation with you from the Czech Republic currently, where I'm teaching English, and I was having streaming conversations with folks back in the Bay Area who are up late at night, and here I am in the early morning, and we're all losing sleep over this event, and it's really poetic. It's really poetic.
It is, isn't it? It's like it's such a bigger message behind what happened. It's an interesting thing, because I've been known on record to be very anti brands over the years,
sure.
And then this project has been so good for me on so many levels, because I've met various people. And one of the things that's changed in my mind is that you can associate a brand as this entity. But the thing is, these brands have people working for them. And I think sometimes people forget that, yes, the sport's been commercialized. They are, a means to an end in some ways. But Nike have millions of people that are involved with them, and they're all human beings passionate about running. And I've been lucky enough to meet various people in New Zealand involved with the Nike brand, and they're amazing people. So my kind of view's been diluted towards brands when you meet people involved with the brands, if that makes sense. So I could kind of see that whole event, the people behind it, the commentators, the supporters, 3 years worth of work just behind the scenes alone.
Sure.
Such a team effort to get to that end goal. And I think that's kind of, in my mind, what running and the culture is. At the end of the day, it still requires you to put 2 feet on the ground and run forward. And you can't move away from that reality, can you? So, do you think there's hope for cross-country running to come back and become more popular based on that?
Well, I'm a little bit opinionated from my own stance, of course, but I wholeheartedly agree. I think the two camps are real. I think that kind of a few folks are looking at this and saying, well, if this is how it's going to be, then it's how it's going to be, and kind of watching it from afar and saying, there's no money in it, there's no prestige. And the other camp of enthusiasts who are really saying, no, we absolutely have to embrace this opportunity of competition, of national representation. And I fall into the latter camp. I fall into the idea that at this point in time, in 2017, we're at a kind of a crossroads with the sport.
Right.
And if we embrace the opportunity and say, listen, we really have a chance here to create something and make it really just powerfully global, powerfully representative of every culture and every facet of the globe, with young people and elites and even masters and older runners to really embrace this chance, because really, there's so many fans of cross country running. People who say this is why I started running.
Yes.
People say, who brought me into the sport. It's the best part of running. And looking at your local competitions, there really is still a great audience for this sport. And so I'm hopeful that we can see kind of a better acceptance. And of course, with the book coming out this January, you can find it on Amazon, of course. I think that history, kind of the story behind, the event and the narrative will really lead people to find out, wow, it really is kind of a special thing that we should be taking more seriously.
From me on the outside, one of the issues I feel with some of the history of and prestige of some of the track sports and even some of the cross-country sports, it does come across sometimes as being quite kind of elitist and quite exclusive. So, do you think that impacts people's kind of wanting to be involved with the sport more? Do you think that alienates people?
Well, I think some of the hindrances, right? You looking at the kind of the current state of things. How did we get here? Well, the first, the knowledge part of it is really important, and I think that learning about the history does empower you, right? It makes you feel like I am representing my state, my local club, or even my nation in some cases.
Right.
And I think part of it is the apathy that comes with not paying attention. When you let these events slide by, and then of course there was a lot of momentum in the 70s and 80s, and it kind of faded away.
Right.
We lose track of what's really valuable with cross-country running,
right.
And people have kind of accepted it as being an optional season or an optional sport,
right.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And so it begins by making cross-country the emphasis. And making people aware that they don't have to run obstacle course races to get a good, challenging outdoor workout.
Yeah.
You can do cross-country runs nearly anywhere in any environment.
Yes.
And like I mentioned before, every elite athlete that you talk to loves the sport dearly and looks at it as being crucial to being successful in any other endeavor.
Right.
And so, of course, I sit here and I say, why aren't more people doing this? But of course, the challenge is balancing this idea with road running, with marathon running, because each of these things has their place and deserves all of the notoriety it can get. So
yeah,
in the wider gamut of athletics, if more attention was paid to this and more marketing was put into it, I really believe that it could grow huge when it comes to representation in the coming years. But it will take a sustained effort, I think. And I think learning about the background and the history is kind of step one to the process of saying, oh, yeah, think of the long list of people who participated. I want to be part of that list too.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's interesting because in New Zealand, I'm not sure about back in the States and Europe. The Athletics Association here tends to not promote cross-country running very well. Let's just put it like that. I've spoken to people involved with Athletics New Zealand who want to change that, but they never seem to be able to do it because ultimately they don't put enough resources and prioritize it enough, and the investors don't deem it as making enough money. So It stops. But then every year they want to promote it, and they want to promote the mountain running scene. They want to promote the cross-country running scene, but there's never any momentum for exactly the same reasons as what you're describing. I mean, there needs to be some quality investment of time and resources to make it happen. You can't just decide, cross-country running is in vogue this year. Let's do a couple of Facebook posts, and there's not even a centralized place to really go in New Zealand to actually find out when all these events are actually on. So, do you feel that might be one of the issues, that there's so many events happening in the running world that if people knew more about where the events were, local to them, and they had access to that, do you think that would encourage more participation?
I think that's absolutely a huge part of it. And I look again back into the past. Athletics as a sport has had this really difficult relationship with professionalism. And other sports like football or hockey or basketball, any of the major sports at the turn of the 20th century really embraced the opportunity for professionalism.
Right.
I think the Olympic stage is necessary to make cross country even more recognizable. But I think locally, if you look at the success of obstacle course racing or the acceptance of mass media marketing, social media marketing, the amount of charitable foundations that are part of donations and features and accomplishments of the actual events themselves, there really is kind of an unlimited cap to how cross country could embrace those methods and include amateurs and professionals alike together, because it's an event that anyone can do.
Yeah.
There's no track qualifications that exist for people to participate in a cross country run, and really getting muddy and getting outside with your mates. That's at the heart of everything that sport is about.
It really is.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it doesn't take very much money when it comes to organizations who say, okay, well, how much do we have to spend to make this worthwhile? Really, if you put a prize purse for a professional team or winner to qualify for the World Championships and say, listen, you're really going to be well taken care of, and you're representing the best of the best that New Zealand has to offer, or Australia has to offer, or the United States has to offer. I mean, I can't undersell the idea of patriotism when it comes to competition. If my nation is on the line, I'm going to run my gourd out just trying to make the team.
Yeah.
And really, it's the most egalitarian of all events. No one's going to judge you if you're from some corner of the nation that hasn't been represented before. Anyone can do it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think off-road running in general just definitely seems to be a little bit more down to earth, and I think, applying that to cross-country running scene, there's definitely a lot more. It seems to be a little bit more sophisticated than general kind of just trail running. There's definitely, I think that's because of the history and the way that the events are actually put together with regards to the level of competition. But behind all of that, from my experiences being at some of these events, it's a really honest time for people. For some reason, there's just a lot more honesty on those courses. People just seem to be freer and more open, and the challenge is different because we've already discussed the fact that the ground could be softer, it could be harder, there could be a slight incline, it could be, there's just there's something definitely more open and just kind of heartfelt when people are on the dirt. So I can understand why Sebastian Coe and other athletes actually say what they say. I mean, do you feel that because they're outdoors in nature, that has a big element to the kind of connection that they have with the sport as well?
Well, I think the natural element is really an opportunity more than it is a hindrance. One of the detractions of cross country is that track specialists can sometimes suffer. There's a famous RUP certified kind of meme that circulates on the message boards in the States, which came from a time in which Galen Rupp and Alberto Salazar pulled out of a cross country event because it was deemed too dangerous to compete on.
Right.
And it included rutted sections and tree roots and things like that. Of course, that were far too dangerous for someone of that caliber, I suppose.
Right.
No, but the natural element of cross country is the X factor. I mean, we see in the States all the time that the big names aren't always the victors at the end of the race because of the natural conditions. You have Mo Farah losing to a guy from the United States, Garrett Heath,
Right.
who has not won a single Olympic medal, and yet has defeated the gold medalist at 10,000 meters.
Yes.
You know, and it really speaks to the quality of the competition and the terrain when you put two people next to each other, kind of a no-name underdog and a prestigious Olympic champion, that you have that sort of opportunity to collect some scalps, so to speak.
Yes.
And beat the big names.
Yes.
Because of the terrain.
That's amazing.
And,
yeah. I think I see that. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but trail running events here, that's exactly what happens. And it seems to be the way in off-road events. You'll have someone that might dominate for a year or two, and then boom, there's just people winning that you've never heard of, you know. Excuse me. You know, we've had trail events here where local pig farmers have demolished the you know, long-standing champions, and you know, and they come and go, and it's just so exciting. You just don't know. You don't know who is. When on that start line, there is you think that you kind of know that there's going to be a champion because they've been consistent, but there's so many unknowns, more so off-road. It's exciting.
And the history of the sport is filled with these stories, which makes it completely compelling.
Yes.
And you know, this is part of the reason why I think there's great opportunity for the sport to kind of have a revival of sorts, because, you know, companies can really play off of this. It's a terrific marketing opportunity to say anything can happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's so unpredictable. And in the same way that marathon running is kind of like that, you know, track and field a little bit less so. It's a little bit more predictable with the big names.
Right.
But cross country, like I said, the terrain has that X factor. You've got the course conditions. You've got, you know, teams from all corners of the globe of names you've never heard of.
Local advantages. You know, that local advantage. I like that.
Right. I mean, in the most recent World Championships, you had the home Ugandan runners just, you know, running completely out of their minds in front of the home crowd, you know, and it added a very unpredictable appeal to the event that was just captivating, because you weren't sure if they could pull it off. In some cases they did. In some cases it ended terribly and the wheels fell completely off.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have all sorts of drama that can take place. And I really think it's one of the special qualities of the sport. Yeah,
I know. I think it definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've got goosebumps just sat here talking about this, because that's it for me too. And when you verbalize it, because we know it, but what you're doing is kind of verbalizing it, and you're putting it in writing, and, you know, telling a story. Just a couple more things. Do you?
Sure.
The people that you spoke to when you were researching for the book, is there anyone that stands out? Have you got a favourite kind of connection that you had with any individuals?
Well, the irony is thick. For me, having Craig Virgin be the first person I really talked to was enlightening. He ended up flying out from Chicago to the Bay Area and actually missed his flight at one point. This is a funny story. But in his departure from Chicago, he got bumped back because I think he missed his flight out of there. Right. And so I had to host him in a kind of an uncharacteristic evening at my own house. He got to sleep on my pull-out couch. And that's kind of unflattering to Craig, but it's one of those wonderful side notes to writing the book, that you never would have expected a 3-time Olympian to be sleeping on your pull-out couch.
That's great.
So that's a charming part. But Ben Rosario, who's the head coach of the Northern Arizona Hoka 1-1 elite, he got in touch with me instantaneously when I reached out to him, and provided a lot of the commentary about where he hopes the sport is going in the future, and having his support and his perspective was really, really cool.
That's amazing.
And